MDT NT MAAeT WAe, the Words of Truth 1. Chapter 4 is what I woke up to, remembering on a Thursday in June of 2002. And this is also 37 verses. This is MDT NT, words of deity and the commands from him. So obey and respect them. Pay close attention, because this is a way to enlightenment. Give not of your respectability to anyone. Give not of good things to unknown use. What has been revealed to be good, partake of, and what is revealed to be bad, partake not of. Be of happiness, and remember your Creator. Your suffering is due to the evil of the created. Work not with fire beings. Don't invoke them or serve their wants, for only NT WAe is worthy of worship. Mourn not excessively. Love deity with all thy heart. Vig, soul, Ba, Wa, Next, and Might. Life is one of the greatest gifts we've received. Follow the commandments of NT WAe. Do what you believe is right. Control one's desires. Tum Itu Katsvat Yameh Dahre Aa Tum Pa Yuri Shanu. Stir not strife like those who were before you. Don't set out to be set apart. Kill not even the smallest plant, except by just reason. Don't go to bed without new sart, knowledge. Don't or haven't sought out after to be set apart. Yaman Wax Hasak. Obey the rules of the land, except for restricting religion. Do not what isn't natural. Take not what isn't yours. Violence is only in self-defense, or to end injustice. Commit no sin. Siep hum the chi your the uab against purity. Tum shum ra, utter not evil words. To meet asu, judge not hastily. Behave not with uka, carelessness. Engage in deep reflection upon what is good and sacred daily. Always try to think the good thought. Always try to speak the good word. Always try to do the good action. Miserable will be those who oppress. Miserable will be those who serve worldly things. Ba, worm, for all things doth return to dust. Miserable will be those who delight in the suffering of others, for their pride will turn to mourning, and the wicked pleasures will become pain, for they will dwell in fire of unimaginable heat. This is the punishment of justice. Look towards the ancient place of worship. Is not the proof of the coming end to be shown in the east and west skies? And what are your thoughts that came up with that?
I picked up, like following the good within, making the most of each day. It's possible to live life to its fullest, without causing harm to anything or anybody.
Now let's also
And
remember that a lot of these groups that focus way too much on like, one of our rules is do no harm. Almost every
Yeah.
group that focuses on that doesn't keep to that.
right. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And I notice also, oh, I'm not even on the right page. So continue and I want to have this on the screen
Mhm.
every episode of this that I can. So in chapter 4, which verses were that? 28, 29, and 30. Very much sounds like the Zoroastrian creed. And just like this thing opens up. So this is connecting to stuff that's out there, stuff that's been, before. And so basically it's encouraging me to keep studying the world, the world scriptures. And the focus on the wants. So when it's further taking me away. See, I was already not Christian at this point. And one of the things that, for good, basically, I'm not so stubborn that if I somehow thought it was right that I wouldn't return, but I don't see how that's possible. The more I know, that's whatever. But but this is taking things beyond that sort of idea of deity. It's sort of beyond whatever people tend to think of as deities, because deity at the sunset, deity this. Well, it's like, but it's not the more limited forms. And their pride mentioned in verse 34. Well, pride is not just you're pleased with yourself or something. There's an implied illusion or delusion about this. And just as we've seen previously, you got these terms, whether you choose to accept them or not, that are kind of how you're going to be processed. And other things you're processed about, this backdrop here. I've inserted the laws of MAAeT from one of the documents, and in translation in the meme, and and it's sort of a judgment scene. You got the scales, but you kind of know what's going on because you're saying the oaths, and it's like, have I done this that I shouldn't have done, or did I not do this that I should have done? It's like as you're saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And the East and the West, we're definitely in an age right now where we don't have to, that this nonsense that we're in the West, so we have our way. We're in the East, we have our way, and it's like it's not really either. But some of this stuff you're living beyond this terms. It's like my one series that I'm going to start to work on, commenting on those stories. Well, the point of the stories is taking it beyond these particular terms. We're not talking about one place in Europe or something like that. These are stories that are supposed to be taken outside of those contexts. And nowadays everything is. And we can go back to these ancient sources or whatever, our own experiences, and kind of, and that's obviously what my mind was doing in my sleep. I don't remember much about what was going on here. I only have this stuff written here. Siep tum ji yer uab. So committing no sin against purity. And I should have said ooh every time I had in English. So I transliterate because you don't always remember these languages terribly well. So it does aid sometimes to add transliterations, and it makes it useful to other people. It's like, well, you have all this stuff in your journals and notes about in all these different languages, and we have no idea how it's supposed to sound or what it's supposed to say. It's like, so I leave that partially because when I die, someone's going to pick this stuff up, maybe. So the Beg or the Ebe, and ancient Egyptians, we have the Nuxt, Suxt, Athir. So power, strength, and authority. I used to do more Egyptian-based rituals, and this was during a time when I did that. I did the Great Heat Festival. I sometimes would do the Little Heat Festival and the Spring Equinox, the Mahust, is that the name for the summer solstice? So the Hundagus, Rakunwar, I would do different Egyptian festivals as sort of voluntary little practice. And so those were three of the gestures that I would tend to use. And
now, the gestures that you just showed, were those like greetings or?
well, when you see them in hieroglyphs, that's what you have. You have power, you have the strength, and you have the authority. And so when you see these, usually they're holding something. They hold something very specifically like this. But authority is like this, even though it's like a weaker position. You don't want to fight people like this.
Right.
It's how they do on the whatever, but that's the position, authority. But otherwise,
Okay, I got you.
And of course, Maat or Ma'at is the it's not something that is, one of the things that people don't understand. There was an Egyptian group, and I think I've mentioned it before. It disappeared, but supposedly there were some issues, and I understand why they were reacted against if those were the issues going on. But there was this group, the Nefra. So the goodness of divinity, and they saw all the Egyptian god names and forms as if it was the same deity, but the forms weren't really the deity. But ritually, you could use the forms. So it was more. It was a more Egyptologically correct. I don't need that sounds like a word, but form of what the Golden Dawn does.
Right.
Because the Golden Dawn would have the Golden Dawn wouldn't pronounce hardly anything right. I mean, there were other issues in the pronunciation, but you know what I mean. So that's sort of where it starts. So they would Latin was said like Italian, and they jumbled in a bunch of languages that were European that they tended to say right or understand right, but then they threw in Greek and some other stuff, and then a lot of the misunderstanding grew beyond issues with added letters or other pronunciation issues. But a lot of people, they try to, the ancient Egyptians, they would have multiple versions. It's like every king would have his own versions, and maybe his son would have the same version of the Book of the Dead or something. And so they'd be writing new versions all the time of all this stuff. And that's another thing important to remember too. A lot of this magic, as we call it, that's passed on, it's like, well, it's made to be changed or whatnot. Some of it is actually conveying religious experience or something like more mainstream religions do, but a lot of it is just meant to be worked with and adapted and kind of not understood in quite that way. And I think there's a reason, for example, why the Bible, we don't know who wrote what and what's been changed. And I mean, we know some of that, but it's like, do we know that this was supposed to be revelation? Was this supposed to be inspiration? Because there's a difference. Was this sacred history that was just, what we considered this to be sacred history? Is this comments of the various scholars and stuff? We kind of assume it is, because some stuff is like, for some reason, like the stories, the prophet figures, in the Bible, the prophet figures got worse and worse of individuals as the stories got passed on. And I feel like it was the rabbis that wanted themselves to look better than those they call them prophets.
Kind of like the changes might have been intentional, maybe.
Well, I think that's it too, because they, one, back in the day, they could make it more difficult and it wouldn't really kick people off the table, but nowadays it sort of does.
Mhm.
And, and here, one of the things that, a couple of things in this chapter that kind of came through too is you got to be careful with your actions, particularly when it comes to that which can do bodily harm. And you got to be careful about how you consider things. Because I personally do not blame people for having a feeling, for having an emotion, for having a thought. Now, some choices that they make can lead to some of that, but just having a thought or a feeling or an emotion, why are we criticizing people for that? What their judgments, what they actually believe, what they actually choose to do about that stuff, that's a completely different thing. I'll admit flat out, I've been, now I don't think I ever misused things, but some of those prescription medications are very addictive. When you quit them, you feel like you crave it worse than when you skip a day eating.
Yeah.
I was raised in a church that you did skip a day, once a month, you tried to skip a day eating as part of fasting. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints recommends that the first Sunday of the month, I think you skip it, you don't eat during the day, and you offer that money, you offer some of that money as a fast offering. So both those things I tried to do growing up, and you feel more drive when you've been on painkillers or you've been on ADHD medication or something like that. You feel more of a pull towards that than you did the food that you're trying not to do. I think I also after I quit the church and before I got sort of a whatever an ethic, maybe that's not the best process, but I decided I'm going to do one of these 3-day fasts like the Cherokee and stuff do. And first of all, they're supposed to stay in one place, so I didn't do that. And I know it was over 48 hours. I ended up passing out, and then I broke my fast when I woke up. And
it's very hard to do.
So a 48, no food, no water, whatever. Most people can do dawn to sunset in any climate. You go too far up into Canada, you just don't have dusk or dawn anymore. That's not, you kind of adjust to more regular hours, maybe fast 18 hours or 16 or something. But I think anything outside of 16 hours, you can cut it back a little bit. Does that make sense? Because more regular days, it's like, well, okay, what's the example they were looking at? It's like, so dawn to sunset range went up to what, 15, 16 hours for the person who was saying this, or some of the people that were doing this. So,
and like with fasting, like the amount of activity that a person does that can have a big influence.
Well, the type of fasting that I typically do is something that I can sit back and how much time's left? Okay, less than 2 minutes. If you want to do chapter 5, we can do that. But I'm physically disabled, so what I can do when I fast is what I can do when I don't fast, and I couldn't do it not fasting if I can't do it fasting, if it's that sort of day. So that's it with that. And so yeah, and some of that is in the plants. I'm fine, so I'm careful with the plants and stuff like this. I'm typically just fine with the plants. I mean, I did almost die because I mistook bergamot for oranges, and I did almost die because nobody told me that those beans were supposed to change color.
Oh no!
I mean, who would have thought that one? They should have put that, it's not safe until they turn bright yellow. It's like, what?
Right. Yeah, they need to label that stuff.
That's and we have the difference between, and some of this is stuff like my philosophizing when I was a kid. I have these little journals, and I have here the 4 commandments, and I have life is the greatest gifts we've received, and that was already one of the things that I used to meditate, and all my meditation was I'd sit still and shut my eyes and See, I didn't even say it right. That's not really proper. It's so aum. It's not but people simplify it. But anyway, so that's what I did, and I think that was something I got in a meditation. Is I had these 4 lists of things, and so love God and other and do what you believe. Oh, that could be this could be a verse. Love deity with